Tim Drake is brother-shaped. By Graphic Nobody. A Batman all-media types fanfic, rated for teen and up audiences. With additional tags for Tim Drake is Robin, Jason Todd is Red Hood, Dick Grayson is Nightwing, Stephanie Brown is Spoiler, Tim Drake needs a hug, Tim Drake gets a hug, Jason Todd is good with kids, Jason Todd tries to be a good sibling Dick Grayson, good sibling Jason Todd, good sibling Tim Drake, canon typical violence, Tim Drake angst, POV Tim Drake, POV Jason Todd, good parent Bruce Wayne, bad parent Jack Drake, gaslighting, child neglect, child abuse, it gets worse before it gets better, angst with a happy ending, unreliable narrator Tim Drake, DC stands for disregard canon, Bat family, and hurt comfort. Summary. As Tim stood in the entryway of Park Row Women's and Children's Shelter with Miss Walker, Steph and 3 other classmates staring up at the fucking Red Hood, prepared to give them a tour. He reflected on how he got there. His dad wouldn't be in the country and paying attention to him for once if Mom hadn't died. And Mom wouldn't have died if Tim hadn't become Robin. And Tim wouldn't be Robin if Bruce had handled his emotions like a goddamn adult after Jason died. So really, it was Jason's fault Tim was in his territory today. Or, a few months after the events of Titan's Tower, Tim Drake and Jason Todd are forced to cooperate due to Tim's school assignment. As Jason begins to begrudgingly get to know his replacement, he grows concerned about the kid's home life. Had Bruce become an even worse father in his absence? Or was he missing something? Chapter 1. As Tim stood in the entryway of Park Row Women and Children's Shelter, with Miss Walker, Stephanie, and 3 other classmates, staring up at the fucking Red Hood prepared to give them a tour, he reflected on how he got here. Tim would like the record to show that this was Miss Walker's fault. Okay, maybe that wasn't entirely fair. Tim was the one who signed up for volunteer hours at a shelter in Crime Alley. But Miss Walker was the reason he needed volunteer hours in the first place. She had told his father that it would look good on college applications during his last parent-teacher conference, and his father jumped at the idea. So yeah, blame Miss Walker. Tim didn't even know how Jack learned about the conference. It wasn't like he had ever attended one in the past. This whole hands-on parenting shtick that he had adopted since waking up from his coma was getting old fast. But Tim agreed to the summer gig to get his dad off his back. He even managed to convince Stephanie to join him, sacrificing precious summer sleeping hours. And it wasn't like he expected Jason Todd to be sidelining as a volunteer coordinator when he wasn't a crime boss. Really, not his fault. In fact, why not just bring the blame back to the beginning? Jack would be in the country and paying attention to him for once if his mother hadn't died. His mom wouldn't be dead if Tim hadn't become Robin, and Tim wouldn't be Robin if Bruce had handled his emotions like a goddamn adult after Jason died. So really, it was Jason's fault Tim was in his territory today. Or was it the Joker's fault? Whatever. Tim was getting off track by now, and had definitely missed half of Jason's welcome speech. So here Tim was, at 8 a.m. on a Tuesday, staring up the man who kicked his ass in their last meeting, as they received assignments for a summer project. Thanks a ton, Miss Walker. It was a slight consolation that Jason didn't look any happier to see Tim than Tim was to see him. Tim tried not to feel too smug about the fact Jason couldn't attack him, and blow his cover for whatever case had him here. Not that Tim was sure Jason would attack him in the first place. Dick and Bruce claimed they had reached a sort of tentative truce with Jason that involved them staying out of Crime Alley, and him limiting his murderous tendencies to the worst criminals. Like any good compromise, no one was particularly happy about it. Tim most of all, seeing as he wouldn't be allowed to patrol solo for a long, long time. But still, Tim was at least 65% sure Jason wasn't going to leave him bleeding out on the shelter's gross orange shag carpet. Tim watched with an odd mix of amusement and trepidation as Jason stared at him and Stephanie, eye twitching. So, you two will be assisting in our child care program for the summer. Right now, we have 5 kids, ages 4 to 12. but that will change week to week. The crime boss turned babysitter turned stiffly and led the two teens back towards the small room filled with old toys, crying kids, and general overstimulation. Tim glanced at Steph, trying to see if she was as freaked out as he was. He was surprised to see that she looked at ease with the situation. What an icon. Tim aspired to reach her level of unbothered. But, Jason had literally beat him half to death, in one of his only safe spaces, so it wasn't likely. He'd just have to fake it till he made it. Before entering the room, and after ensuring they were out of earshot of their teacher and the other volunteers, Jason whirled around, pointing a finger at Tim and Steph. "Okay, listen up, you little shits. I don't know what you're doing here, but you better not bring any bat drama with you," he hissed out in a whisper. "These kids came from fucked up homes full of abuse and neglect. They don't need you making it worse." Steph looked generally unimpressed by Jason's statement, mouthing "bat drama" to herself while shaking her head. Tim felt his lips tug up a bit before he schooled his expression. Jason's eye twitched as he took a menacing step towards Tim, opening his mouth to say something that would likely be dramatic and unnecessary. He caught himself, glancing over his shoulder at the group of small children who were watching the encounter with wide eyes. Jason cleared his throat, rolled his shoulders back, visibly reined in his temper. "Your shift ends at noon." With that statement, Jason pushed past Tim and Steph, knocking into Tim's shoulder as he went back the way they came. Steph turned to Tim, raising an eyebrow. "Are you gonna mention this to Bruce?" "What, and let him freak out and make me quit? I'd be stuck at home with my dad all summer. No way." He shook his head. Steph just laughed in response. "Let's go face those little gremlins, then." Jason was pissed. When he said no bats in the alley, he didn't think he needed to specify that civilian identities were included. Jason had been volunteering at this particular shelter almost since he arrived back in Gotham, all those months ago. As the Red Hood, he provided extra funding for upkeep, and protection for the residents. Word had spread quickly through Crime Alley that the place had his particular attention, and it kept most of the abusers from trying to track down their victims. A few busted kneecaps took care of any idiots who didn't get the message the first time. During the daytime, he provided support as J. Peters, volunteer coordinator and general helping hand. At first, Jason had worried that his scarred appearance and overall looming stature would make the residents uncomfortable. Several of the women in residence were clearly wary in the beginning, but an incident in his first week that involved an angry ex-husband, and Jason was very creative with a potted plant that changed their minds. The kids had seemed to latch onto him from the beginning. They looked at his 6'2", muscly, League of Assassin-trained body and somehow saw a jungle gym. Whenever a new child arrived, usually bruised and jumpy, they only had to watch him interact with the others for a little, before letting down their guard. He could barely make it 5 minutes without one of the squirts climbing up to sit on his shoulders, or swinging from his outstretched arm. Not that Jason minded. He and his mom had been residents at shelters like this on more than one occasion in his childhood, and he always had a tendency of taking the younger kids under his wing. It was nice to be viewed as a safe person to be around, rather than the ticking time bomb his family, the Bats, viewed him as. Though, remembering the broken and bleeding form of his replacement on the floor of Titan's Tower, staring up in horror as his assailant revealed himself to be the former Robin, they may have had a slight point. Yeah, not his finest moment. But still, no bats in his alley. He had been perfectly clear about that on his first encounter with Robin. And look at him now. The kid had clearly recovered fine. No death, no foul, no whatever the saying was. Jason gave himself 10 minutes to hide in a coat closet and recover from the jump scare that was seeing his replacement at his day job. Once he was sure his temper was in check, thanks Talia for the breathing exercises, he headed back to the playroom, ready for a civil conversation. Arriving to see his replacement absolutely crash and burn with the littles helped a bit. For a Robin, he sure was bad with children. The oldest, a 12-year-old girl named Marley, who had arrived with her mother last week, seemed to have rightfully clocked Tim as a loser and latched on to Stephanie. The other children had followed her lead, and were all clambering around the blonde, trying to get her attention with various toys and books. Jason watched his replacement awkwardly offer to read to 4-year-old Juan, who promptly burst into tears and ran over to clutch Jason's leg. Jason easily scooped the kid up, patting his back soothingly. "Ah, it's okay, Juan. Did the big meanie scare you?" Tim sent an affronted look his way, which Jason took great pleasure in ignoring. Stephanie looked a bit baffled and overwhelmed by the positive attention she was receiving, and was absolutely no help to her friend. Jason remembered her mentioning on one of their weekly waffle breaks, which the bats knew nothing about, that she was an only child. She probably wasn't used to small children. Jason wiped Juan's eyes, setting him back down and ruffling his hair. "Why don't you go ask Rita if she'll play blocks with you?" The 4-year-old sniffed and nodded, heading over to play with his older sister. Jason stood up straight. "Hey, kid." He jerked his chin at the replacement. "I need to talk to you for a minute." The brat rolled his eyes and stood up, following Jason out of the room. Jason led the way into a cramped office, shutting the door firmly before turning to face Tim. He had a sullen look on his face, arms crossed as he glared up at Jason. Damn, this kid was shrimpy. "What are you doing here, replacement? I thought I made it clear. No bats in the alley." Jason sneered down as he loomed over the kid. Tim just rolled his eyes, completely disregarding Jason's usually effective menacing. "It's a school assignment, Jason." "It's summer." "What can I say? I'm an overachiever. Didn't exactly get a say in where I went. I'm not thrilled to be here either." "Oh, so you're too good for this place? Typical rich brat. Upset you have to dirty your hands with street trash?" Tim groaned, rolling his eyes again. The kid sure was laying the teenage attitude on thick. "Whatever, man. I'm only here for a month. Tim Drake only, no nighttime business. Then I'll be out of your hair, and you can go back to beating up preschoolers or whatever it is you do in your free time." Jason growled at the accusation, green creeping in the edges of his vision. "Red Hood doesn't hurt kids." The replacement gave him a long, blank look before raising an eyebrow, in a move clearly taken from Alfred. Jason felt his eye twitch again. Whatever, Robin didn't count. Tim stopped being a kid the second he decided to dress up like a traffic light and beat up goons in his spare time. "Are we done here, or—" Jason huffed, opening the door and storming out without a reply. Never mind that it was technically his office. He could have a dramatic exit if he wanted. 1 month, the kid said. Just get through the month. Jason wasn't even at the shelter every day. He volunteered on Tuesdays and Thursdays and filled in as needed. He could survive a month. Jason took it back. He could not survive the month. He had made a point of showing up for at least an hour to check on the shelter every day since the replacement started volunteering. No way was he trusting that brat to keep an eye on the kids. Even offset by Stephanie's surprising competence, it was clear that Tim Drake was a walking disaster who shouldn't be trusted with the lives of those younger than him. Jason had watched him walk in daily with a giant can of some neon-colored energy drink, which he was sure he had overheard the kid referring to as breakfast. He had then observed him walking into a wall on no less than 3 occasions. Clearly, the caffeine wasn't doing much. Additionally, Jason wasn't sure the kid ate actual food. He seemed to exist purely on caffeine and spite. His raccoon-like eye bags suggested many late nights, despite Jason knowing for a fact the kid was benched from Robin duty. On more than one occasion, Jason had snapped at him for dozing off on one of the beanbags in the playroom. All of the other volunteers showed up with some sort of packaged lunch daily, but never Tim. Tim just had those stupid energy drinks. How was Alfred allowing this? And whatever protein bars Stephanie managed to bully him into eating. When Jason was still Robin, Bruce and Alfred had him on a strict diet plan to maintain the health needed for vigilantism, while helping him recover from childhood malnutrition. Clearly, standards had dropped in the Wayne household. Either that, or the little shit thought he was too good to listen to basic rules. Granted, Jason wasn't a paragon of obedience during his Robin days either. No Robin was. But he at least understood the importance of maintaining his health. They were only 5 days in to the arrangement, and Jason was realizing his elaborate revenge plan had been unnecessary. The kid would get himself killed within a year. If not as Robin, Jason pretended the thought of another kid dead in the uniform didn't make him sick. Then, by general self-neglect. Terrorizing him slowly stopped seeming like justice, and it started seeming more like kicking a puppy. A broody, angsty puppy with a caffeine problem, but a puppy nonetheless. Jason had started bringing some sort of pastries with him from his favorite bakery on the days he volunteered. He told himself it was a treat for the kids. God knew they could use something nice. If the replacement ate some of it, then Jason wasn't going to stop the little freeloader. He knew keeping Stephanie away from free food was a lost cause, and it would look suspicious if he fed one of the volunteers and not the other. Jason was resolved to keep an eye on the kid. Not that he cared, but if Bruce was slipping that much, it would be helpful information for his own operations. Chapter 2. Tim loved his dad. He really did. A few years ago, the thought of seeing Jack on a daily basis would have been a dream come true. His dad had always been the fun parent, warm and jovial in comparison to his fairly aloof mother. When he was around, it was great. Jack used to ruffle Tim's hair and call him champ, pulling him into his side for hugs, and bragging to his friends about how smart his son was. Those precious moments were almost enough to carry Tim through the many, many cold nights spent alone in the penthouse or boarding school. When Jack first woke up from his accident, Tim was tentatively looking forward to more of those good times. Surely his dad wouldn't be traveling anymore, now that he was in a wheelchair for the time being, and Mom wasn't around to plan trips. And, at first, things were good. They were really good. Tim and his dad moved into Drake Manor, right next to the Waynes. His dad was too tired to go out most days, between physical and occupational therapy, and fatigue from the pain medication. But they stayed in and watched movies together. Jack usually got bored and wandered off halfway through, or fell asleep with a drink he definitely wasn't supposed to have, but it was the thought that counted. He started dating Donna, and it seemed like they might be a real family for once. But then Drake Industries went under, and they had to sell the manor and move into the city. Tim knew his dad didn't like staying in the brownstone. It held too many reminders of Mom. Tim would catch Jack staring at pictures of Janet Drake at times, sometimes glaring, sometimes crying, always with a drink in hand. Donna had lightly admonished him for drinking with his medication on one instance. The resulting mess of broken glass took Tim and Donna's combined effort to clean up. Donna didn't bring it up again. Tim didn't have the same control as Donna. He was stressed about school, and being Robin, and starting to chafe at the living with parental supervision for the first time in his life. Sure, the 6 months he lived at Wayne Manor had offered some structure, but Bruce had always kept things fairly distant and professional when he had taken Tim in out of some misguided obligation. Alfred nagged him about eating regular meals and getting to bed on time, but Alfred did that with everyone. Tim had always taken care of himself, and Bruce seemed to respect that. So when Jack started nagging him, asking where he had been, why he was out so late, why he was always spending time with the Waynes, didn't he want to spend time with his own father? Tim had gotten snappy. He always walked away from those encounters feeling ashamed of himself, cheeks bright red as he cleaned up broken glass or guided his crying father to bed. Thankfully, it hadn't happened in front of Donna yet. Having her witness his childish behavior would be too humiliating to bear. One time, Tim tentatively broached the subject with Bruce, mentioning that he and his dad had argued. His mentor had encouraged Tim to give his dad time. Overall, the man had lost his wife, been in a traumatic accident, and woken up from a 6-month coma to find his son living with another family. There was bound to be some growing pains. Tim tried to take his advice, tried to be a good son, but it was just as hard to have the same arguments night after night. His friends at Young Justice were more sympathetic, but still helped little overall. Bart and Cassie tended to send mildly concerned looks his way when he relayed his fights. Tim didn't give their opinions much weight, though. They didn't exactly have stable father figures to compare Jack to, and the closest thing Con had was Lex Luthor and Superman, which was its own situation that was best not to mention. Stephanie was a lot more understanding. She knew what it was like to feel conflicted about a parent. She and Tim had always understood each other. He would listen to her rant about her father's half-baked villainy plans, calling him all the names in the book. Tim would cheer her on, but never say a word against Arthur Brown himself. In return, Tim would share details of his fights with Jack, including the gritty, embarrassing moments when Tim lost his temper. Steph would laugh and crack jokes, but refrain from speaking negatively about Jack. It was comfortable. She understood that sometimes dads just sucked. So, when Tim shuffled into the empty brownstone, dropping his bag by the door, he was relieved and ready to finally be alone. Spending a week with his predecessor breathing over his shoulder had him even more exhausted and on edge than normal, and he was ready to vig out on junk food and spend some time back in the cave. His dad and Donna were out on some trip for the week, though Tim didn't know where. He had tuned out when he heard the words, romantic getaway. All he knew was that he had a whole week to finally relax and stop feeling like he was on edge in his own home. Even better, Dick was driving in from Bloodhaven to go out on patrol with him tonight. Stephanie had mentioned potentially joining them as spoiler this week, but she usually stuck to the Bowery, which wasn't on their usual patrol route. Tim hadn't been out as Robin all week, as Bruce had encouraged him to spend more time at home. Tim took a nap for a few hours in preparation, before heading to the manor. He strolled in at 7 p.m., heading to the kitchen to greet Alfred. "Hey, Alfred," Tim called with a smile, hopping up onto a stool. "Master Timothy." Alfred gave him a warm smile as he wiped his hands on a towel. "Right on time. I need a taste tester." When Tim had first started spending time at the manor, after the initial fraught months of Robin Hood, when Bruce finally started to thaw to his presence, he had always denied Alfred's attempts to offer him food. He knew he wasn't part of the family in the way his predecessors were. He was here for business and to be the light to Batman's darkness. Staying for meals felt like crossing a boundary. He hadn't been expecting Alfred's patient, gentle insistence. Usually adults were pleased when Tim offered to make himself scarce. But it became clear that Alfred was determined to feed and care about any living being under his roof. And make no mistake, the manor was Bruce's in name only. Still, Tim was stubborn. He patiently and politely denied all attempts to invite him to join in for family dinner, or to stay the night after a long patrol. Tim knew Alfred felt some sort of obligation to him, as did Bruce to a lesser extent, but he refused to impose when he had his own, empty, home to return to. Alfred was clever, though, and this wasn't his first time dealing with bull-headed young boys. When he realized Tim wouldn't accept help for his own sake, he started reframing his attempts as asking for a favor. Could Master Tim please help him in the kitchen, or give his opinion on this new recipe? Tim, ever happy to please, acquiesced much easier than before. Eventually, he caught on to Alfred's game, but by then a habit had been formed, and he was another victim to Alfred's admittedly delicious cooking. Tim and Alfred made casual conversation as Tim tucked into his meal. He shared some stories about his time spent at the shelter, leaving out any mention of Jason. The old man always got a sad look in his eyes when his pseudo-grandson was mentioned, so they tried not to talk about Jason around him. Alfred let out a fond laugh as Tim shared his many fumbles working with the children. "Young man, I have watched and listened over comms many times as you helped children during patrol, and they adore you." Tim groaned. "They adore Robin. It's different when I'm in the suit. Robin is magic." Tim carried his empty plate over to the sink. "I just crack jokes and show them cool flips and tricks until they cheer up." Alfred raised a brow. "And you can't do the same as Tim Drake?" Tim shook his head, searching for the words to explain. Tim Drake isn't magic. He's just some nerd who tinkers with computers and can't do a flip to save his life. Alfred frowned at that, opening his mouth to reply, but it was called off by a familiar call of greeting. Ah, that would be Master Richard. Tim hopped down to follow Alfred out of the kitchen, and into the main hall, as Dick kicked off his shoes, duffel bag slung over his shoulder. Dick dropped the bag, running over and scooping Tim into a big hug. "Timmy! Ready for patrol?" Tim flailed a bit, always caught off guard by the older boy's tactile nature. Dick didn't seem to mind, setting Tim down and ruffling his hair, as Tim fought to hold back a blush, leaning slightly into the gesture. "I just need to head down and gear up." Tim started towards the study, Dick and Alfred following behind. "Is B joining us?" Dick shook his head. "Did you check your phone? B got called out on some JL mission last minute. Something about Lex Luthor releasing a bunch of androids in a shopping mall. Probably his latest attempt to woo Superman." Tim laughed while Alfred just shook his head at their antics. He actually hadn't checked his phone. His pre-patrol nap had gone long due to his severe addiction to the snooze button. He had to rush out the door to make it to the manor on time. Tim headed over to the grandfather clock and made his way down the stairs. Patrol that evening was fairly uneventful. All the major rogues were in Arkham, or Blackgate for the time being. By midnight, Robin and Nightwing had lowered their guards slightly, and were perched on a roof by Batburger, drinking milkshakes as they waited for any crime updates from Agent A. "Got any plans this week, Robin?" Tim shook his head, finishing his shake with a loud slurp. "I might swing by the tower tomorrow, if the others are around. We're overdue for a movie night." "And what will you tell your dad?" "He's out for the week with his girlfriend." Dick frowned a bit. "I thought he wasn't traveling as much anymore." "He isn't. This is a one-off thing." Tim was always a bit uncomfortable discussing his dad with Dick. He knew the older boy hadn't had a great opinion of his parents before Tim moved into the manor. When it became clear that Tim would go back to living with Jack Drake, Dick had offered multiple times to let Tim come stay with him in Bloodhaven. The thing is, Tim wasn't dumb. He knew it was irresponsible for his parents to leave him alone all the time as a child. But that's just how things were. It contributed to his lore. He wouldn't be half as funny as he was if he had normal, attentive parents. And being funny was an essential Robin trait. But his dad really was trying. Some parents just show their love through extreme mood swings and unpredictable parenting approaches. Tim didn't give Jack much of a choice. He wasn't the smart, well-behaved son his parents had asked for. It was easier to pretend when Mom and Dad were still traveling. He could put on a good show for the week or two they'd come home, impress them with his report card, and maintain an even temper. Now that his dad was home for good, he was seeing the real Tim, and Tim knew he was an easy kid to love. Damn, maybe Steph had a point about Tim needing therapy. Well, maybe you can come over sometime this week. We can go train surfing like we used to. Make a day of it. Dick bumped their shoulders together. Tim shook his head. "I have that volunteer thing, remember?" Dick groaned. Yeah, I guess I can't argue against charitable work. Sometime soon, though, okay? You haven't been over in forever." Dick pulled the final word into a long whine and flopped over against Tim dramatically. Tim laughed, pushing the older boy off him. Okay. I'll visit soon." Dick perked up with a wide grin. Their comms crackled to life in that moment. Agent A informed them of a robbery in progress, 12 blocks away. Tim grabbed his grapple gun, jumped to his feet. "I'll race ya!" He jumped off the roof before Dick could respond, laughing at his accusations of cheating. By the time the two called it a night, it was nearly 3 a.m. Dick dropped Tim off at the apartment once he had changed into civvies, calling a reminder that he would be heading back to Bloodhaven Sunday afternoon and wouldn't be able to join Tim for patrol. Tim privately decided to go out on his own. What Bruce didn't know wouldn't hurt him. Jason was really tired of seeing the replacement. It's bad enough running into him as J. Peters. Seeing him as the Red Hood was just asking for another beatdown. Sunday night, he saw him on his way to a meeting about some new drug shipment, when he heard a woman scream. He redirected his grapple in the direction of the sound, a vicious grin spreading in anticipation for the fight to come. Sure, breathing techniques and baking were great stress relievers, but since going into the pit, nothing helped him keep a handle on his anger, quite like kicking ass. It only took a minute for the sound of fighting to reach Jason's ears. He landed silently on the edge of a building, looking into the alleyway below. A young woman in heels and a short dress was backing away from a group of 6 men, whose attention was otherwise distracted by a small figure in bright colors. Robin. Jason sat back to watch the show, sticking to the shadows. No doubt the big bat was nearby, and Jason was not in the mood for a reunion. Despite Robin being outnumbered, the men in the alley were clearly outclassed. Within moments, the replacement had 4 of them on the ground groaning, and had engaged the remaining 2. The woman, like any smart Gothamite, was long gone. Jason watched as a stray punch caught the replacement on the chin. He recovered immediately, but it gave one of the men on the ground a second to pull out a handgun, taking aim at Robin's exposed back. Seconds later, Jason was standing over the bleeding man, his own smoking gun in hand. He turned and shot the 2 men still standing without hesitation. Robin whirled around, bow staff at the ready, and faltered when he saw Jason. "You shot them," was all the kid said, tone accusatory. Wow, really stating the obvious. Jason chuckled, keeping his gun ready, but aimed at the ground. "You're welcome." Tim glared at Jason. "I had it handled." "Sure, kid. That guy was about to turn you into Swiss cheese." He kicked the goon by his feet, causing him to let out a groan of pain. "Ah, still alive then." That would save him a visit from the angry furry, at least. Speaking of which, where's Batman? He watched Tim hesitate for a moment, as if unsure if he should answer. "He's on a league mission." "Oh, so he's letting you run solo again?" Hadn't the old man learned anything? Jason watched his replacement shift in place, his posture taking on a distinctly guilty air. "He doesn't exactly know I'm out?" Was that a question or a statement? "Look, just don't tell him you saw me, please. He'll totally bench me if he hears I ran into you alone." Jason grinned underneath his helmet. "Oh, and why shouldn't I tell? Maybe Robin being benched isn't a bad thing." Jason had no intentions of following through on that threat, as that would require actually talking to a member of the Wayne family. But the kid didn't need to know that. Jason's amusement turned into confusion as he watched the replacement lower his bow staff and slump his shoulders, staring at the ground in defeat. "Please, Hood." He looked up with a pathetic expression. "Remember that time you tried to kill me?" Jason spluttered, searching for a response. "Hold up, are you trying to guilt-trip me?" Tim didn't drop the pathetic posture. "Is it working?" "No, stop making that face, it's creeping me out." Tim increased the pout. Jason was sure if he could see behind the domino mask, a pair of big blue puppy dog eyes would be staring at him pleadingly. Dick had clearly been giving the replacement lessons. Fuck, is it working? Why was it working? "I'm a crime lord, kid. I'm not craving to a 12-year-old. 15. What? I'm 15, not 12. Same fucking difference. The kid was still holding that creepy-ass face. He stared at Jason intently, not wavering, even as Good number 5 let out another moan of pain. Okay, fine. Jason threw his hands up in defeat. "I won't tell the bat." Tim immediately perked up, grinning. "Thanks, Hood. You're the best." He pulled out his grapple gun, aiming it at a nearby roof. "The police will be here in 30 seconds, by the way." With those parting words, Robin grappled away. That little shit. With a final kick to the thug at his feet, Red Hood scrambled back up the fire escape, and onto the roof. With any luck, he would still make it to his deal on time. Chapter 3. When Tim was 8 years old, his parents took him. It was the first, and only, time he had been allowed on a trip with them. They called it an early birthday gift, despite his birthday being a month away. Tim understood how busy their schedules could get, and he was grateful for the chance to spend time with them. They had spent the week staying at a beach house in St. Petersburg, Florida, and it was the best week of Tim's life. His parents had shown him all of their favorite spots in the town, as his father shared stories of visiting with his own parents as a child. They went to the beach every day. His father chased him around and splashed in the water with him, while his mother searched for and collected seashells and sea glass. They made a game out of finding as many colors as possible. The last day of the trip, they stayed out on the beach to watch the sunset. Tim had sat close to the shore with his father, building an elaborate sandcastle decorated with some of the shells his mother had helped him find. Little Tim was extremely focused as he used a bucket and paddle to add the final tower to the structure, and he failed to see the big wave coming in. Jack had been around to chat with Janet, and when the wave hit, knocking Tim over and the castle with him, he remembered the feeling of cold shock when water shot up his nose and over his face, as he coughed and spluttered, unable to sit up, with the seawater still rushing in. He wasn't even scared, simply stunned. When his father scooped him up and off the sand, his mother by his side, as she fussed and wiped his face with a towel, Tim had burst into tears as soon as he could suck in a breath. Rather than admonish him for being a baby, his parents had cooed and comforted him. He remembered his father calling him brave, and offering to stay out late to rebuild the castle with him. His mother had put up a token argument about bedtimes, but had folded very quickly, watching fondly as they rebuilt the structure bigger and better than before. It had been the best birthday Tim ever had. Once they were back in Bristol, his parents had gifted him his beloved camera, and shared the news that he was officially old enough to stay home alone, without a nanny. It was the last birthday they had spent together as his parents started spending more and more time abroad. When Tim walked into what he thought would be an empty apartment after patrol, and was immediately set upon by his angry father, he felt a bit like he had when that wave hit him. Not scared, not upset, just shocked at the unexpectedness of it all. "Where the hell have you been? Do you have any idea what time it is?" Jack stormed over, yanking off Tim's backpack and throwing it aside. "You're home?" was all Tim managed to say, his brain feeling like molasses as he tried to reconcile being yelled at in what was meant to be a quiet, empty room. Jack just scoffed. "Oh, sorry to disappoint. Imagine how I felt when my trip was cut short and I came home to an empty apartment, and my son nowhere to be found and refusing to answer his phone." Tim winced as his brain started coming back online. He knew his dad worried more these days, and answering when he called had always been a strict rule. Unfortunately, no civilian phones on patrol was an even stricter one. "Dad, I'm sorry. I thought you and Donna were out of the country. I didn't think to check." "So it's my fault, then." Jack threw his hands up. Tim stepped back half a step, bumping into the door. He hated how close Jack was standing. "No, of course not. Do you know how hard this past year has been? I ask so little of you, Timothy. You barely have chores. I pay for your schooling and phone and whatever the hell else you want. All I ask for is a little consideration." Tim winced. I know, I'm sorry. If you would just listen." "No, I'm the parent." Tim balled up his fists, heat building in his chest as his dad cut him off again. "You listen to me. How the hell am I supposed to trust you when you come home in the middle of the night after being God knows where?" Tim snapped, unwilling to just stand there as his father yelled. "I didn't know you would be home. You never used to care where I went. How the hell was I supposed to know it would be any different this time?" Tim knew instantly it screwed up. His dad didn't tolerate disrespect, and he certainly didn't tolerate criticisms of his parenting. He watched as his dad took in a deep breath, glaring down at him. Tim shifted nervously, nausea setting in his stomach as the heat drained away. "Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't mean that." "Phone." "What?" Tim tried to keep up with the turn of the conversation. "Give me your phone. Now. If you aren't going to use it responsibly, then you don't need it." Tim hesitantly pulled out his phone, handing it over. This wasn't an unusual punishment. In fact, it was one of Jack's go-tos. In the past, Tim would just wait until his parents left for another trip before sneaking into their bedroom and taking it back. He never had to wait long. Still, Tim hated feeling cut off from his friends in the Waynes. Sure, he still had his emergency communicator in his room, but he couldn't use that without looking suspicious. And he didn't exactly want to tell Dick and Bruce that he had gotten his phone taken for being irresponsible. That was just embarrassing. Tim watched in confusion as, rather than pocketing the phone and continuing his lecture, Jack took it to the kitchen. Tim followed behind. Dad? Jack didn't respond. Instead, he took the phone and dropped it into the sink. Tim watched in increasing horror as his dad turned on the tap, followed by the garbage disposal. A horrible, metallic screeching sound filled the space as his phone was destroyed. "What the fuck, Dad?" Tim ran over, staring at the broken remains of his phone. Jack was looking at it in slight surprise, as if he hadn't been the one to do it. After a moment, he shook his head, turning bloodshot eyes on Tim. "Go to your room, Timothy." The rage was gone from his voice. He just sounded tired. Tim looked at his dad, then back at the sink. He felt a strange sort of numbness settle over him as he turned and climbed up the stairs to his room. Tim closed the door softly behind him before climbing into bed, not bothering to change. The red LED time on his alarm clock caught his eye. He was surprised to see that it had only been 30 minutes since he left the Batcave. Tim rolled over and closed his eyes. By the time Tim's alarm went off, he felt like he had barely slept at all. He slapped blindly at the nightstand until the beeping stopped, wincing when the alarm fell to the ground with a crash. Hopefully, that hadn't woken up his dad. Tim sat up, rubbing his eyes, as he looked around his bed for his phone. It only took him a moment to remember the events of the night before. Tim flushed in humiliation, as he remembered how he had yelled at his dad. He hated acting like that, like he had no control over himself. Tim took pride in his sense of control. It had been an essential skill all his life, one that his mother had praised him for. But lately, that control seemed to be slipping more and more. With a groan, he got up and headed to the bathroom to get ready for another morning at the shelter. Tim headed down to the kitchen in search of breakfast. He was unsurprised to find the fridge and pantry fairly bare. When Donna had started coming around more, she had been appalled by Tim and Jack's collection of ramen, cereal, frozen meals, and other perfectly practical food for two men who never cooked. She had taken over the grocery delivery, stocked up on ingredients and fresh produce, and generally banned anything she viewed as junk food. It quickly became clear that she was what Stephanie would call an almond mom. This was all well and good, except neither Jack nor Tim could cook anything. Tim had started making an attempt to learn, but hadn't been particularly successful. Tim grabbed a slightly mushy apple and rinsed it off in the sink, ignoring the remains of his phone. He would leave that for his dad to clean up himself. Tim always stopped at a convenience store to pick up a Zesty or Red Bull to get him through the day, which basically counted as breakfast anyway. With sustenance taken care of, Tim grabbed his backpack from where it had been left by the front door, and started his walk to the shelter. It was a bit of a long haul, but the weather was still mild this early in the day, and the fresh air always helped him wake up. It also gave Tim an excuse to leave early enough to avoid his father, which he tried not to feel too guilty about. Tim arrived in Crime Alley around half an hour later, an extra large caramel frappe in hand. Apparently, the convenience store he usually stopped at in the mornings for an energy drink had been overrun by giant mutant subway rats during the night, and would be closed indefinitely. So, until Tim found another place to stock up, he would be a coffee drinker if he wanted caffeine. Tim walked in, saying a quick hello to some of the other volunteers, who had started to become familiar faces over the past week, as he headed back to the playroom. After the first few days, Tim had asked about being switched to a different task in the shelter. Tim didn't know how to connect with the kids. He barely knew the first thing about domestic violence. As Robin, his job had been to spot the situation and keep the kids calm and distracted until more permanent help arrived. Now, he was meant to help them adjust to a new life. It was too far outside of his realm of experience. Unfortunately, Miss Walker felt it was important for him to follow through on his commitment, or something like that. Never mind that he could actually be helpful if they just let him review their cybersecurity or something else that played to his strengths. At least this way, he got to spend more time with Steph. He entered to see Stephanie and Jason sitting at the table in the corner with a box of donuts, laughing at something on Stephanie's phone. Apparently, Jason and Stephanie were something like friends. That had been a strange discovery over the course of the past week. Stephanie shared that their patrol routes overlapped, and when Jason had tried to tell her to stay out of the alley, she had laughed in his face, reminding him that she was actually from Crime Alley and wouldn't be kicked out of her own home. A truce had been solidified when the two got caught in a fight with some of Black Mask's goons and had to team up. It helped that Steph was more accepting of Jason's morals than the rest of the Bats. Now they met up for weekly waffle breaks and to complain about Bruce. Tim was trying to accept this development with good grace. It was easier when Stephanie shared that she had nailed Red Hood right on his stupid helmet with a brick after he attacked Tim in a truly inspired parallel to his own first meeting with the blonde. So Tim didn't hesitate when he saw the two. Instead, sitting down next to Steph at the circular table and leaving a healthy space between himself and Jason as he grabbed one of the donuts. Jason watched the replacement shuffle in, carrying some sugary monstrosity as he sat down at the table. "Hey, why didn't you answer your phone? I asked you to pick me up a coffee." Stephanie pouted at the boy. "Sorry, Dad took my phone." Tim's voice was rough, like he hadn't fully woken up. Steph winced in sympathy. Jason frowned. "I thought he was out of town." Tim gave him a strange look, which Jason couldn't decipher. "He came back early." Jason grunted. Bruce never punished him as Jason for offenses committed as Robin. If he had been caught sneaking out on a solo patrol, Bruce would have benched him, not taken his electronics. Jason was having a hard time wrapping his head around the changes in Bruce's parenting approach. Back with the League, Talia had made it sound like the Waynes were all one big happy family without him. Tim Drake was supposed to be the perfect replacement as both Robin and son. He was raised by loving, rich parents, and settled into life as a Wayne more smoothly than Jason ever had. Batman actually listened to him, and treated him as a partner on the field, rather than sidelining him and distrusting him, as he had with Jason. When he shared his plans of attacking the 15-year-old with Talia, she had given him some major side-eye, but hadn't objected. Jason had thought that taking the new Robin down a peg, clipping his wings, would fix the burning sensation in his chest and eyes whenever he thought about the dynamic duo. It hadn't worked. Now, Jason was starting to question Talia's information. Multiple times through the past week, he had heard Stephanie and Tim talking about Bruce and various arguments the two had gotten into. Clearly, there was trouble in paradise. Jason was pulled out of his thoughts when Stephanie continued the conversation. "How long is he keeping it this time?" Tim took a long sip of his coffee. "He stuck it down the garbage disposal, so indefinitely, I suppose." That caught Jason's attention. "I'm sorry, he fucking what?" Jason knew Bruce had a temper, but that seemed out of character. Tim withdrew a bit at Jason's outburst. "My dad put my phone down the garbage disposal. He'll probably replace it once he cools off. I think." Jason tried to wrap his head around Steph and Tim's casual reaction to that behavior. "And Alfred was okay with this." Alfred doesn't know? It only happened last night." Tim grabbed another donut, taking a large bite. "You're telling me Bruce put a phone down the manor's garbage disposal and Alfred didn't notice? What the fuck was happening? Bruce?" Tim looked confused. "Oh, no! Bruce isn't my dad. I have parents." "Not your dad yet," Steph interjected. "That adoption addiction is just waiting for a chance to shine." Tim showed no sign of hearing her, despite being directly next to the blonde. Jason was totally lost at this point. "But you live in the manor." "No, I live with my dad in the city." Tim looked at Jason as if he was the one spewing nonsense. "But you..." Jason glanced around to make sure the kids hadn't arrived yet. "Robin," he hissed. "Robin is Batman's son." Tim stuffed the rest of the donut into his mouth, speaking around a mouthful of pastry. "Nah, we're more like slightly close co-workers. I let him pretend he's in charge, and Bruce has no say over my life. I guess he was, like, my foster dad for a while, but that was just so I could keep going out at night. Steph rolled her eyes, stage whispering to Jason. He's in denial. Tim ignored this comment as well. There is so much to unpack there. Jason shook his head, letting this new reality settle in. Also, stop chewing with your mouth open. It's gross. Before Tim could retort, Juan and Rita ran into the room. Rita made a beeline for Steph, while Juan climbed into Jason's lap, asking him to read a book. As per usual, both children ignored Tim. Jason was only half paying attention as he opened up a Thomas the Tank Engine book for Juan. So the replacement was less of a replacement than he thought. Still, he did steal Jason's title, his uniform, his life. Okay, Jason, deep breaths. But Tim Drake wasn't Bruce Wayne's son. He had a father who considered destruction of property to be proper parenting. The idea didn't sit well with Jason. As much as he disliked the little shit, he was only a kid. Jason didn't love the idea of him going home every day to a man who would behave like that. Jason knew enough to know that angry men often became violent men. Hell, he was a prime example. Jason kept his eye on Tim for the rest of the shift. He wasn't sure what he was looking for. A sign, maybe, that things weren't right at home? It was really none of his business. It wasn't like he cared about the brat. A nasty voice whispered that this kid had strolled in and stolen his life before his body was even cold. He deserved what he had gotten at the tower, and he would deserve whatever he got now. But he was just a kid, he reminded the voice, and Red Hood protected kids. Why did he forget that with Tim? Chapter 4. It didn't take Red Hood long to find Spoiler on patrol that night. Her stealth skills were improving, but her patrol routes were still easy to predict. She was crouched down on the edge of an old laundromat in her familiar eggplant gear when Jason landed with an intentional thump, alerting her to his presence. Stephanie whipped around, hood pulled low over her brows, and cowl pulled up over her nose so only her eyes were visible. She relaxed a touch when she saw him. Today's not waffle day, Hood. What are you doing here? I have a question about Robin. Steph crossed her arms. Do I need to find another brick? I thought you agreed to lay off him. It's not that. Red Hood took a seat on the ledge, waiting for Spoiler to relax. After a moment, she lowered down next to him. The two sat in silence for a minute, looking out at the city as Jason gathered his thoughts. What's the deal with his dad? He finally asked, deciding to take a direct approach. Steph looked up at him. What do you mean? The thing with the phone. Is that normal behavior for him? Steph let out a sigh. Yeah, dude's a major douche. I don't think he's broken Tim's stuff before, but it wouldn't surprise me if he had. Jason was not pleased with that answer. What kind of stuff has he done before? Let's just say Robin is an insecure shit for a reason. She sighed. Look, Hood, I don't know why you care, but I'm not gonna sit here and air out his dirty laundry with you. He barely tells me this stuff as it is. I don't want to betray his trust. Why hasn't Dickface done anything about it? I know B is useless for this kind of thing, but I'd expect Nightwing to know the signs. Steph shook her head. He only tells me things because I don't make a big deal out of it. Do you think Dick would stay calm if he heard what Tim told us today? Jason shook his head, recognizing the point. He remembered what it was like as a kid, when he still had hope that Willis would be better. He knew how hard it could be to admit a parent was flawed. So, does this mean you don't hate my best friend anymore? She bumped their shoulders together. Jason rolled his eyes under his helmet. You know, it was never about him. I still think he's an idiot for putting on the Robin suit, but it wasn't personal. I needed to get B to understand that there should be no more Robins. You remember I was Robin too, right? Yeah, and you're as much of an idiot as the kid is. Spoiler smacked his arm in mock offense. She and Jason had talked extensively about her short run in the suit. finding camaraderie in their mixed emotions about carrying that legacy. They had joked on more than one occasion about being the reject Robins, too angry and impulsive to be trusted with the mantle. The two sat in companionable silence for a while longer, taking in the soothing lullaby of sirens, gunshots, and distant screams that was Gotham. You never wanted it, you know? Steph broke the silence after a while. Who never wanted what? Jason kept looking ahead. Tim, she said quietly. He never wanted to be Robin. Jason turned to her in disbelief. I'm not saying he doesn't want it now, Stephanie continued. I think he loves it more than he'll ever admit. But he told me once that all he ever wanted was to be a normal kid, and to help people. Being Robin wasn't the plan. He did it because Batman needed him. Jason scoffed. Batman is a grown man. He shouldn't need a child to help him handle himself. I agree, Stephanie said softly. But Tim doesn't see it that way. He needs to be needed. He always has. I think that's part of the reason why we never worked as a couple. I didn't need him, and that scared him. Jason didn't respond, unsure of what to say. It didn't excuse Tim for taking his title. It didn't excuse Bruce for allowing it. Welp, Stephanie stood up, dusting off her pants. That's enough emotional talk to last me a month. I'll see you tomorrow. Jason stayed where he was, mulling over what she had said. Yeah, I'll see you. Steph shot him a mock salute and grappled off into the night, leaving Jason with his thoughts. Jason was acting weird. Not that Jason had ever acted in a way that Tim would categorize as normal. The man dressed up in tights to beat up a 15-year-old as a way to cope with his daddy issues. He cried over Thomas the Tank Engine books. Tim had pretended not to see that, before going out to shoot drug dealers. He ate his Oreos one layer at a time, cookie, then cream, then cookie. All in all, a weird, violent man. So, when he started acting nice, Tim was suspicious. Now, Jason wasn't actually being nice by any reasonable standards, but his behavior towards Tim certainly shifted over the past couple days. It started with breakfast. The first day Jason brought in food for the kids, Tim had been prepared to have his hand smacked away when he grabbed a croissant. Instead, Jason had ignored him entirely. Then, this morning, he had actually dropped a second pastry on Tim's plate and told him to eat up. Tim had been half suspicious that it was poisoned or something, until Stephanie stole a big bite. It wasn't just at the shelter, either. On multiple occasions, Tim had seen distinct flashes of red out of the corner of his eye as he went on patrol with Dick. It stung a bit to know that Jason didn't trust Tim to handle himself. He knew he was the weakest Robin. He didn't have Dick's acrobatic grace, or Jason's brute strength. Still, Tim thought he had proved himself at least competent enough to not need a babysitter. Tim was sure Dick had noticed Hood's presence as well, during weekend patrol. But neither of them commented when the occasional stray bullet took out one of the goons they were fighting. The shots were always non-lethal. Things came to a head when Tim was walking home from the shelter on Wednesday. Streets were fairly crowded, and Tim was hoping to make it home before his dad returned from occupational therapy. He decided to take a shortcut he was familiar with from his rooftop escapades. He ducked into an alley right outside of Park Row, keeping his head low against the afternoon sun. Within moments of turning, he was seized by the shoulder and shoved against the alley wall, knife against his neck. Phone and wallet, now. The thin, reedy man who had grabbed him jabbed at his neck with a pocket knife, sneering down at Tim. Tim held in a groan of annoyance. The man's hold on him was weak, and he could easily slip out of it, using moves he had learned as Robin. Unfortunately, he wasn't Robin right now, and Tim Drake did not have the necessary skills. Here... Tim held out his wallet reluctantly. It would be easy enough to cancel his cards. But he was one punch away from a free cup at his favorite froyo place. He had really been looking forward to trying their new Superboy flavor. The man grabbed his wallet, stuffing it into his pocket, before shoving the knife back into Tim's neck. Phone 2, hurry up. Tim winced as the knife bit into sensitive skin. I don't have a phone. Bullshit, rich brat like you. Hand it over. The man dug the knife in harder. eliciting a pained gasp from Tim. Tim shifted his stance, getting ready to throw the man off, when a shadow descended over the pair. Jason Todd ripped the mugger off of Tim, punching him in the nose once, twice, before letting the man drop onto the alley floor. He whirled around to Tim. "Are you okay?" Tim rubbed his neck, staring at Jason in surprise. "What are you doing here?" "Saving your ass, apparently." Jason reached towards his neck, causing Tim to flinch back. The older boy hesitated for a second before grabbing Tim's chin in a surprisingly gentle hold, tipping it back so he could look at the cut. "Looks pretty superficial. Shouldn't need stitches." Tim pulled away, still feeling caught off guard by the situation. "Seriously, what are you doing here? Were you following me or something?" Jason crouched down, grabbing Tim's wallet from the man's pocket and handing it over. "I was in the area." "Right." Tim looked around the otherwise deserted alley. "In the area." Jason stood back up, scowling at Tim. "What the hell are you cutting through an alley in this part of town anyway? Don't they teach you common sense in school anymore?" Tim rolled his eyes. "I was taking a shortcut. I didn't exactly plan to get mugged." "No one plans to get mugged, dumbass. Now come on, I'm walking you home." Tim spluttered as Jason grabbed his arm, pulling him towards the mouth of the alley. "I don't need you to walk me home." He pulled his arm away. Why was Jason acting like Tim couldn't handle himself? "You clearly do. This is the second time this week I've saved your ass." Tim pretended the comment didn't sting. Having his former hero see his incompetence was not a good feeling. He scowled at the older boy. "I would have been fine." "Keep telling yourself that, short stack." Despite Tim's protest, Jason didn't leave his side until his familiar brownstone was in sight. Tim spotted his dad's car parked on the street. He turned to tell the older boy that he could leave now, only for him to be nowhere in sight. Tim let out a huff. Drama queen. He headed up the stairs into the apartment. Tim was unsurprised when he saw his father sitting on the couch. Tim kicked off his shoes and set them by the door, heading towards the stairs to his room. "Timothy." Tim paused at his father's voice, fighting off a wave of exhaustion. His neck was aching, and he really wanted to get the wound cleaned and dressed. "Come here, please." Tim took a deep breath before settling his expression, turning and walking over to his father. They hadn't spoken since their fight the other night, and Tim wasn't excited for round 2. He took in his father's appearance, relieved to see that his eyes appeared clear. Jack patted the seat next to him, and Tim sat down. "Here." Jack held out a white box. Tim tentatively took it, looking down to see a brand new iPhone. "It's the newest release." Jack sounded slightly nervous. "I got it in red. I hope that's okay." "It's great, Dad. Thanks." Tim swallowed past the sudden dryness in his mouth, unsure why he felt so strange. "About the other night." Jack shook his head, cutting Tim off. "You don't need to apologize, son." Tim hadn't planned on it. "We both acted poorly. Let's just move forward and forget about it. Okay, champ?" "Dad, you really freaked me out." Tim stared down at the phone as his dad let out a sigh, laying a hand on Tim's shoulder. "I know, son. I'm really trying, alright? Things have been so hard since since she's been gone." To Tim's horror, Jack sniffled. He hated when his dad cried. "I just don't know what I would do if I lost you, too. When I came back to find you gone, I thought the worst. If something happened to you, if you weren't in my life, it would kill me. You understand, son? I would die." Guilt curled in Tim's gut. His tongue felt thick and heavy. "Dad." Jack shook his head, pulling Tim into a hug. Tim automatically hugged back. "I need you, Timothy. I can't do this on my own." "You aren't on your own, Dad. You have me and Donna." Why was Tim's heart beating so fast? "I know I do. You're such a good kid, Timothy. I know you won't leave me." Jack's voice was thick with tears. "I won't, Dad. I promise." Jack pulled back, wiping his eyes. Look at your old man, getting all emotional. He cleared his throat, sending a watery smile Tim's way. How about we order from your favorite Chinese place for dinner? You can spend some time with me. We'll watch that new movie you've been talking about after. Sounds great, Dad. Tim fought against the increasingly familiar numbness that was settling over him. There was no reason for him to be upset right now. Great. Go relax in your room and I'll order it. Donna might join us. Tim stood up and went to his room, phone still in hand. His father hadn't commented on his still bleeding neck. They didn't end up watching the movie. His dad and Donna went out to meet a friend for drinks after dinner. Tim wasn't sure if he was disappointed or relieved. Notes. Tim. I think my dad is trying to buy my love. Jason and Dick, who grew up with Bruce Wayne. Yeah, that's how love works. Steph. I wish my dad would try to buy my love. Please let me know what you think. This chapter's a bit shorter than the others have been, but I'm happy with how it came out. Next chapter should be out Thursday, and will feature some big steps for Jason and Tim. In the meantime, I've decided to try my hand at Tim Joins the Bat Fam Early fic. The setting will have 10-year-old Tim and 14-year-old Jason. Because who knows what their age gap is? Not me. Anyway, are there some themes and scenarios you would be interested in reading in that fic? Tim. The Waynes only care about me out of obligation. Dick. If anything happens to Timmy, I will kill everyone in Gotham and then myself. Jason. I hate the replacement. Also Jason. Kicks the ass of anyone who looks at Tim wrong. We love him. That's very cute. Oh, I love him. One day, trucks will stop passing my building. Jason growled at the fucking hell. Oh, Jason, denial is a river in Egypt. Which is why I like Stephanie Brown. She's just like you for real. If I had to pick a bad family member that I relate to the most, Stephanie Brown. She has a shitty dad and blonde hair. It's me. She's me. Jason is angry at everything. He gives autism in a lot of his writing, and I don't know if that's purposeful or not. And then, fucking Tim Drake is just a freak. He's just like that. Vicky Vale knows my identity. Should I lobotomize her? Tim and Stephanie walking into the manor together, and Alfred holding two plates is like, hey, I need taste testers, and Tim being, like, super polite, and Stephanie being like, yes, absolutely! Honestly, I've never related more. Men freak me out, and when, I went and got my autism assessment, done, the guy who did it was a man. So I was a bit on edge, right? My girlfriend at the time was very touchy, very, hey, we're walking down a hallway, let's hold hands, kind of thing, right? So, he asked me how my girlfriend was, just like, my opinions on her kind of thing. It was like, tactile? Oh my god. My man is so autistic coded. My man, he's over here like, yes, I can mask for those 2 weeks. Good or... Okay. Now they met up for weekly. Tim. Lol, dads, am I right? Steph. Mood. Jason. What the fuck is wrong with you? Easily slip out of it. And he could easily slip out of it using... I'm not allowed to read. There's either cars or there's notifications. Sorry, I closed the door on the cats and they're like, I can see a little paw. Stop going for the door, what the fuck are you doing? We both acted Chat, am I a good boy?